Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Design Principles here at PolyCosm. I want to talk about the difference between drawing from 3D pose reference versus drawing over 3D pose reference. To be blunt here, I personally prefer drawing from reference, and I think tracing over can lead to some issues. But before we go into more detail on this topic, I want to first talk about gesture drawing for a bit. When you first get into drawing, you will hear people talk about gesture quite a bit. And for good reason, because it is a very fundamental part of image making. If you are interested in character design, storyboarding, and any other form of visual storytelling, gesture will be something you'll use all the time. It's a really quick way to place a framework for a figure. Everything else you are going to build on top, such as anatomy, form rendering, color, and texture, all of these will be built upon your initial gesture. This is why you'll hear this word quite a bit and maybe even end up being sick of it, but you should still be practicing it. Now, I don't want to make a whole tutorial on gesture drawing here, because there are already tons of resources from artists who are better at it than I am available on YouTube. Especially Mike Matesi's force drawing theory is a really interesting one. I think he explains really well the fundamentals of how to feel the force of the figure and the importance of capturing that first, without worrying about the smaller details and accuracies. When I'm drawing, the way that I think is similar to this. I'm not that interested in a complete, accurate representation of the reference. The reference is there to help me out, not to dictate me fully. Capturing the feel of the pose and pushing that to serve my needs is way more important. Practicing gesture drawing can really help you understand the fundamentals of this way of thinking. It will also help you stay loose in the early stages of your drawing and teach you to get faster over time. For my first example here, I'm using a model I imported into Blender from DAZ. If you want to learn more about that process, Christina made a fantastic video with a thorough explanation of the whole thing. Make sure you get a viewport render of the pose through a 35mm lens, or your reference might end up looking pretty flat. This usually happens if you get the reference image straight from DAZ, so don't make the mistake that I made. For my second example, I'll be using an image from posemaniacs.com. When it comes to drawing over 3D poses, and I see this happen a lot, artists who use this method end up skipping the gesture phase. They think since they have an accurate model to work with, all they have to do is follow the anatomy and start putting on the outfit, the armor, etc. Within a specific production pipeline, you might be asked to do drawings like that over a 3D model, to create variations on a character's outfit. But when we are trying to create a character from scratch, I think using the 3D model as a reference always ends up producing better results. Of course, to be able to get the best results, you need to practice this regularly and be patient. Regular and deliberate practice will help you develop the required understanding to be able to design better shapes. I genuinely had to draw this figure a few times to be able to get the gesture the way that I wanted it. I wanted to simplify the torso in a specific manner, so as to be able to amplify the band at the waist. You can also experiment with exaggerating the foreshortening on the limbs to force the dramatic perspective even more. I think that is another reason why I like working with this process. I get to make a lot of changes at this early stage to find the most appealing design very quickly. The 3D reference is there to help me out, but I can always break away from its restraints. The final product I'm working towards is a 2D image, so the results has to look good in this 2D plane. I think this is an important part of the image making process, the transition of 3D information into a 2D plane. Sometimes you might have to design a character in a certain pose that will look better for that specific image, from that specific angle. But if you were to try to replicate that in 3D, it will look all wrong from every other angle. This actually reminds me of a talk that I attended a few years back at the Animex Festival in Teesside University. I think I found the same talk on YouTube. It's on GDC's channel. I'll drop a link in the description, so if you're interested, you can go watch it. Matthew Boehm, who's an animator who worked on animations for Overwatch, was talking about his process. At one point, I remember him showing how the animations you see from a first-person perspective looks from a different angle. And right away, you can see how he was tweaking the models around, extending the limbs, skewing the weapons in bizarre ways to make the animation look better from the first-person view. But as soon as you moved the camera off to the side, it all just looked wrong. What I'm trying to talk about here is similar. Just because you set up a 3D scene with a few models and it looks all correct, doesn't mean that it will look best when you're using that as a base to create a 2D image. A lot of the time, you will have to cheat. If you're just tracing over the model, you might be skipping this very important step. This is why I suggest that drawing from reference might provide better results. Okay, I can see some of you now just getting really angry and saying that, you know this one artist who draws like over 3D models and makes amazing work. Okay, yeah, sure. I'm not saying it's impossible. It is possible. Experienced artists can absolutely pull that off, but because they understand form and perspective really well, so they're actually designing as they are working on the character. For them though, this happens intuitively because they have years of practice. If you're just starting out, working over 3D models can become a crutch for you, and it will possibly hurt the quality of your work in the long run. And of course, this is all just my own opinion based on my own experience. And I hope it doesn't come across as an, old man yelling at a cloud or something. It's something I do notice in beginner artists' work, and I think it does hold them back from being able to produce better work. And of course, I love drawing, so I'll take every chance that I get to talk about drawing and tell people that they should draw more. Okay, let's have a quick overview of these drawings that I made. Let's start with this one, where I want to show how I changed the reference to exaggerate and amplify the gesture. As you can, you can't see with red, but I'll draw with blue. You can see with blue the central line of this reference here. And now I'll just draw over my drawing. Yeah, you can see how I right away exaggerated the angle and really forced that gesture back. I pushed that right leg further back and I exaggerated the curve of the front leg, his left leg. And when you look at this arm that's punching, I think I even made it a little bit too long, maybe proportion speaking, but you can get away with stuff like that, it's fine. And his other arm looked a bit too, static to me, so I exaggerated the angle, made it more diagonal. Diagonals always look more dynamic. And yeah, definitely exaggerate the distance between his feet, which gives him this sense of putting his weight forward more, if that makes sense. Okay, let's take a look at this one now, which is a little bit more refined character drawing. And starting with the head, again exaggerating the angles, like the head and the spine, it all follows that center line, so you have to focus on the center line quite a bit. I pushed his head there a lot more than the reference because I felt like I could get away with it, even though maybe it doesn't look quite 100% correct anatomically speaking. The torso as well, pushing that a lot more, creating that nice diagonal angle to really exaggerate his gesture, like he's really about to swing that axe. Made the front, his right foot bigger to force that perspective more, and his right lower leg as well. I exaggerated a little bit, amplified that angle, and his left lower leg, shortened that lower leg a little bit more, which makes it seem like it's going back in perspective more than it actually was. And here we can see like a step-by-step overview of this one. I overlaid the base figure drawing with my reference, and I think that clearly shows how much I have changed. And you might think, oh, why didn't you just do that in 3D? But the reason for that is I didn't know how I really wanted to tweak the pose until I had the reference and I started drawing. So that's kind of my point, that it's kind of difficult to see in 3D sometimes how you need to really push the shapes and the gesture. So that's why I think it's a good idea to have it as reference instead of having it as a base to draw over. And then obviously you just build on top of that base. Alright, that's all I have for this video. You might have noticed that difference in the sound quality. That's because I'm still settling into my new studio and it's a bit empty here. By the next video, hopefully I'll be able to improve the acoustics in here. As always, thanks for your time and we'll see you next week. Take care everyone.